And let's now start with Chapter 1, that's the history of radio before Cold War. Now, people say that if success has many fathers, then radio is one of the world's greatest successes. I'm sure that you will know what it means later on and why so many people in the world say that. Well, it's well known already that in 1897, Marconi was the first one that invented the radio. So I'm sure that you all know that. But did you know that radio, helped 700 people from the Titanic before it sank and took the lives of 1,500 people? Well, I'm sure that a lot of people didn't know that. I didn't know that until recently when I studied more about the radio and found out that actually at that time in 1912, the radio sent distress signals to nearby ships when the Titanic was about to sink. At that time, attracting a lot of nearby ships to come to the rescue and thereby saving 700 people from the ship. Now, about the radio broadcast, in 1922, we know that regular audio broadcasts for entertainment, began in the UK from the Marconi Research Center. And in 1927, that was the first time when Marconi turned his full attention towards long-distance broadcasting, and that's international broadcasting on shortwave. So that began the history of shortwave broadcasting. Now, as we know, the role of shortwave broadcasting or international broadcasting started as early as the 20th century. At that time, famous shortwave radio stations or international radio stations began broadcasting. These stations, as you probably have heard of, and of course, including the radio station from Taiwan at the time, it was in mainland China, known as Central Broadcasting System, and today is RTI or Radio Taiwan International. And along with other radio stations at the time, VOA, BBC, some of the big names in the world, including NHK, they all began broadcasting. That was during World War I. That's between 1914 and 1918, when German and British stations broadcast press communiques using Morse code. So, in a way, we know that international broadcasting began as early as World War I, when I mentioned earlier German and British stations broadcast press communiques. The Dutch began their broadcasting as early as that time, conducting their experiments on shortwave frequencies. That's in 1925. Now, that's one radio station known as PCJJ by Philips Company, a very well-known company which I'm sure that you know is still in operation today, began the first international broadcasting on March 11th, 1927. That's with the purpose to serve the Dutch colonies in Dutch West Indies and Dutch East Indies. Again, Dutch West Indies and Dutch East Indies. And also in German, Spanish, and English for the rest of the world. So apart from broadcasting in Dutch, they also broadcast in German, Spanish, and English. And I'm sure that if you know the history of the world at that time, why they broadcast in German, Spanish, and English, these are all very powerful countries at that time. Now, I mentioned earlier that in 1927, Marconi started to turn his attention toward the international broadcasting, that's long-distance broadcasting on shortwave. So RTI, at that time known as Central Broadcasting System, started to broadcast in mainland China in 1928 followed by BBC, and of course BBC began a bit earlier in 1922, and NHK only broadcast on AM. That was in 1925. Now, international broadcasting, a lot of people were or started to engage in international broadcasting in the early 1990s because international broadcasting is aimed at a foreign audience, not a domestic audience. The foreign audience, by that meaning, is that, some, for example, the Dutch had at that time colonies in East Indies and West Indies. So that was to serve the purpose of broadcasting to the colonies using long wave, medium wave, or shortwave radio. Now, that's the purpose of course, propaganda. Or some radio stations, they would serve religious beliefs, and so they broadcast all the religious programs. Or some other radio stations, they wanted to keep in touch with the expats living in that country. Also, in the same time, they wanted to educate, they wanted to improve trade, and they wanted to increase their national prestige, which is why all these big radio stations in the world started to broadcast on shortwave. And to talk about national prestige at that time, in order to increase the popularity and the visibility of your country, you would broadcast on shortwave so that other people around the world, like I said, because shortwave broadcasting or international broadcasting is to serve the audience living in other countries in the world. So that's why we also, at the time, Radio Taiwan International, under the name of Central Broadcasting, we also wanted to increase our national prestige.